Welcome. It's a great pleasure to introduce Zaha. He's one of a few people that, even though haven't spent any time here before, are here in spirit. They're kindred, I think, to the place. She's an architect who's always had the open-mindedness and the sense of exploration that it takes to invent new worlds. She's had the courage to stay with those new worlds until others began to see them too and wanted to build them with her. She went to London with a degree in mathematics from the American University in Beirut, studied at the AA, and upon graduating worked with OMA. In 1980, she began her own firm. Towards the end of the 80s, she began to build, first project in Tokyo. Since then, she's had a steady stream of projects. Most recently, a fire station for Vitra furniture in Basel. One of the most valuable lessons that we learn as architects is the importance of a coherence of vision. During the many years that it took for her projects to come to fruition and build form, she became prominent as a paper architect, whose drawings and representations defied every sort of gravity there is, physical, emotional, and intellectual. This work was so arresting and seemingly so complete in itself, it was difficult for many to imagine it existing in any other form. Historically, there have been few architects who can push their ideas to the limit on paper and retain all the power of those ideas once they're built. Her work has exemplified how important it is to keep one's vision uncompromised and to realize the great value that there is to be found in the exploration of ideas for their own sake. Zaha Hadid is an architect who is compelled to pursue ideas as a way of leading to work, and you can see this in the purity in the form and the ideas that they take. Her method of working is to keep pushing forward her ideas and concepts until the ideas collide with commissions, which they're doing now. In the first phase of her work, we've been able to inhabit her ideas, and it's great to have her at SCI-Arc for this next phase where we can inhabit her buildings. Please welcome Zaha Hadid.
Thank you. Can I have the first slide, please? Is it possible to turn the light off there? I felt impelled to show very few slides of the peak. It is almost 10 years to date since I won this competition, and in a way, a great many things have happened since then. The peak, I had finished school in the late 70s, and I decided at the time to pursue a career in an office or to go off on my own. And then OMA, Rem and Ilya asked me to join them as a partner. They asked me to join them first as something, and I said no. Being capricious as I was. And they finally offered me a partnership, which was, in hindsight, of course, a mistake, because I was too young and, as Rem put it, too impatient to be a partner. But it was a very important experience for me, teaching with them for 3 years. I only say that because of what I observe in schools like in London now and the AA, that it was a very important period to apprentice in the traditional sense with two very good teachers, and also to work with them. And so the peak, when I won it, people assume I just kind of landed from nowhere. And it was really a culmination of many years' efforts condensed into this project. And the method of which this was kind of done, in a way, it was there were periods in your life where you tested on things, and this was very important for me because, not because of winning it, but because it was kind of culminated a series of ideas which came together. And these ideas remain in a way with me, but things have changed in the last 10 years. And about 5 or 6 years ago, I will not be able to show all the work which has been done in the last 10 years because I used to have a habit, I still do have a habit of showing too many slides, of too many different things. And tonight I will only show 3 projects in detail, and I will just mention the others. And And also SCI-Arc only sent me 3 carousel, which was very lucky for all of you, because I could have gone for a long time. So the product with the peak, which was what was to kind of impose a new condition on Hong Kong, and to, in a sense, by eroding the site, by removing the site, there was a whole layer of kind of conversation which began to occur, which is a method of working, which is to do with layering, and also because the project was called as supremacist geology, which was like a new geology imposed on the land. It created, in a way, for me, a way of thinking, which in a way translated into other projects. The next slide, please. I have a problem tonight also because I don't have a machine in my hand. I'm, too used to flicking things quickly. And this is a sketch which was first started, which was to do with this idea of an X-ray drawing. And I only touch on this because simultaneously it was developed as a mode of devising and working on a new architecture, but we felt at the time that the only way you can actually develop this is by a new way of looking at work. And therefore, the notion of presentation became very important, the use of color, because all of these things I felt at the time that the only way you can actually invent a new language was to actually invent the way the language is presented. So this was a kind of a compressed layer, which is like a kind of all the conditions inside the peak compressed into one level. Next, please. And as this was kind of seen by the jurors, and this is again, I say 10 years ago, which seems like a long time, now this way of presentation has become very much more common and more acceptable. And 10 years ago, nobody could understand the drawings, and I think that in time, people began to read them a great deal more. Next, please. And the whole issue of doing drawing is not only a presentation, but basically tell the story of the peak. This is the story, one story, which is the beam as they cross the landscape, interfere with the land begins to change, and the land is then replaced by a building, by an architecture. Next. And the kind of the dialogue between the building and the city. And the story of the peak is a very long one, because the project was really, in a way, neglected, or I decided not to cohere to the regulation of the competition, but to impose a condition which is quite new. And therefore, instead of saying there are 3 sites, I decided to amalgamate all the sites. And that the project really connected to the condition of the city, but at Hong Kong is a very dense urban condition. And this was a release moment, that it's a building which is to deal with the release of this energy from the city. And therefore, that's why it is a series of beams laid over each other with a central space, which is a void. The idea was to make a new kind of urban space, which connects to the city, but because of its kind of condition, which is unusual, that it can allow itself to be a new situation. Next. And as I said, I will speak about, I in the last minute changed my slides. I had, before I will show the Guggenheim installation, before that I was going to show a series of projects which were done, which really led on to the project which I will show at the end, which is Vitra in Düsseldorf. This project which were very interesting, was one which is a composition what I did for an office building in Berlin. And what began to occur was, this was a very small site, and I'm sorry I don't have it on the thing, but I can explain it. It was a very small site. It was only 2 meters wide, and it was a leftover of the kind of the new context of the city after the war. So it was very, very strange conditions. One of them, which is 2 meters wide by 15 meters long, and it was an office building which cantilevered over the street. And from that, it was like a very unusual urban condition, and it basically was made of series of walls. And as they kind of, between them, they made different kind of spaces. And because of this project, because it was so tiny, I was approached by a Japanese client to do even smaller building, narrower in Tokyo, which was 3 meters wide or 4 meters wide. It became so impossible to dig the site that this project is now shelved. And then a series of projects which was also to do with the carving away, not only making a building, but beginning to carve away space, and to begin to deal with space as a kind of an entity at this moment in time. So by, in a way, rubbing away architecture, you're creating a new kind of space. Tomigai was another building in Tokyo which had to do with the three conditions below ground, middle ground, and above ground. Yet I was given yet another project for another small site, a 0 dimension in Hamburg. And I only tell this because they had to do all with very, very narrow, confined spaces. And that, in a way, I think also, because you had to kind of really exercise an incredible degree of control, it was for me a very useful and exciting experience. And the last year, we've done a lot of projects for cities in Cologne and in Madrid, which are more to do with urban studies, which I cannot show. All this, the Guggenheim installation, maybe some of you have seen it, some of you have read about it. It was a very strange experience for me because it kind of was like revisiting my school, my student days, and remind me of all the issues which had preoccupied me for the past 10 years. Next, please. So as we were, I will show it very briefly. As we were commissioned this project, the whole notion of, this was the Great Utopia show, which was a project, I had seen it in Frankfurt, which was a show which was made of 1,200 pieces. And so the coincidence of showing the non-objective art in a non-objective kind of building, made for an objective work, the work of the suprematists, which had to do with the whole notion of making a new world, suddenly the skyline of the suprematists and the Milevich's tectonics superimposed against the New York skyline. And then the whole issue of scale, the unusual building of the Guggenheim, the fact that it's actually made of a void, the fact that it is not made of, it's a non-corner building, it is made of a series of kind of endless ramps. And the first question when I was commissioned this job was, what would they have the Tatlin model? And they said they couldn't have it from they couldn't borrow it from the Pompidou. So this became a central issue, a central topic of this exhibition. Next, please. So this whole condition, which is the connection between the Russian kind of, in a way, dream versus the American dream, which in part has become a reality at the time of the 30s. Next, please. Next. And how these took all these conditions to do with kind of the idea of scale, the making of a new world, the making of new art, kind of be combined in this one building. Next, please. And what could occupy the spiral, which was the void of the spiral. Next. And because the model of the Tatlin, and so there was this constant, there was this dialogue constantly between the suprematists and the constructivists, which occurs in the show in various layers. So we decided that the void of the Guggenheim would be occupied by an abstraction of the Tatlin, as if it's kind of trying to break through the skylight, and a tectonic which is built because the idea of this exhibition was, it is based on 4 exhibitions, which was to be shown, not literally, but all the work was collected. Some of the work was never shown before. Next. And for me, in terms of my own past, I'm an Iraqi born, and the connection between the Tatlin spiral and also the Samarra spiral in Iraq. Next. So for me, all these kind of cultural conditions really coincide together to be housed at the Guggenheim. And we began to abstract the Tatlin, so it's not really a physical, a literal, because this was intended to be a skyscraper, a tower, so it was really an abstraction of this as free form. Next. And how it begins to kind of really occupy the center, the non-center of the rotunda. Next, please. The tectonic, which was how I came, in a way, this is what triggered off my work, which was a project which was given to us in my 4th year. And through that, I began to kind of really explore the idea of, at the time of fragmentation, the idea of making a new space, the idea of new languages, and also what led to kind of the making of a new fluid space. It was, for me, it was learned from the Russian, is how to invent a new plan which can occupy the ground and it can occupy kind of territories which are at varying scales in the city. Next, please. The tectonic, which was supposed to, and as you well know, there's an extension to the Guggenheim, which is made of a box, the Gothmy box. So there's a kind of also another irony between the right building and the box, the Guggenheim, the round building. The spiral was supposed to be a non-corner building, and the tower is all but corners. And the idea was that, the original idea was that tectonic would invade 2 of the floors of the tower. Next. And then slowly the tectonic began to actually move away from the tower and began to kind of really take over the rotunda. Next. So it bends by the sheer force of the spiral. So it becomes like a bent tectonic. And the intention was that as you place these 4 exhibitions, which was 0, 10, 5 by 5, of Mahu, and the first discussional into the tower, conveniently they've worked there very well. And these were fairly contained exhibitions which were placed in various periods in the 20s and the 30s. And that this journey, the spiral operates the ramps as a kind of an armature connecting these exhibitions, and it will be occupied by a series of work which connected it. And the idea that you start with suprematism, which is after 0, 10, and that slowly as you move through the spiral, the intention of suprematism, which was to become an architecture, becomes a space, and it shields the main space. And as you pass through the architecture section of the show, you pass by the tectonic, which has become an architecture. Next, please. So these pieces were supposed to kind of cantilever over the ramps. Next. And how these two worlds of Malevich and Tatlin occur at these different moments. Next, please. A drawing showing all the intended infiltration into the Guggenheim. The idea that some of these drawings, which are abstract paintings, could be finally made into like spaces, so they become extruded, so they become kind of a space, and they generate a movement within the space. The porcelain, which had to be housed, had to be kind of put on a dining table, so that it was moved from the realm of the art to the realm of kind of utilitarian condition, as it was intended to be used. Next. And this is the organization of the show, that in the spiral all starts with the high gallery in the Guggenheim. They wanted to put all the posters there, which I thought would look like a kind of a Russian laundry. So decided to put only 2 objects in the room. There was a strange logic. It was the highest room, so they had to put many posters. And we were in a way, we had great luck with this show and bad luck. The great luck was that they commissioned me to do this installation in July, and the opening was in September. If I had more time, they would have changed more things. But to be fair to them, they were quite supportive at moments. But the main elements were not done, and I thought it was a kind of a lost opportunity. Because it was a really historic moment that all these work are housed in this one museum. So in the tower, which is on the far left, are all these different exhibitions, and the spiral, it starts off with agitprop, which is agitatory art, which then becomes a zigzag wall, which shows all these street-like art. Then it starts with the kind of with like people like Kandinsky, and it moves up to 5 by 5, and then it ends up in a kind of lithograph and books and architecture, and at the end it ends with the kind of the top spiral occupied by the figurative work of Malevich, and the last room, which is the first discussion, was some people's view is like a real relapse in the Russian movement and the avant-garde movement, but it has some excessively, incredibly important pieces, very beautiful, if one can call them beautiful, and really repulsively ugly pieces. So it was this very strange world. Next, please. So 010, the storm. Next. This eventually occupied one of the small monitor room, which is became a dining table. Next. And the idea that you display the porcelain not like kind of work of art, but as utilitarian pieces. The 5 by 5, the intensity of this room was that you see these pieces of these Popovas, mostly almost and Rodchenkos, which were stunning, almost suspended in the room. The room was supposed to be very dark, and only the art is lit. And as you, towards the back of the room, we had to put on 2 Rodchenkos, which required a great deal of controversy, because I wanted to put them, which were black on black, and I wanted to put them on a black wall. And I was accused of killing Rodchenko. And thank God James Wise came to my rescue, and this person attacked me in the opening and said Rodchenko died of an orgasm. So it created many, many anger conditions. Next, please. So these were the paintings which were suspended on these glass plexi walls, which seem as if they are suspended. So you see all of them almost at the same time. Next. All these, again, I have a habit of giving everybody a nickname in the world. Some are very attractive, some are pretty unattractive. And I gave this show also nicknames, which deliberately to make the curators hysterical. And so I called the room which housed these pieces, which is Omahu, the Sputnik room, and made them very angry because to them a Sputnik has a different kind of meaning. And they came and saying, please tell Zaha it's not a Sputnik. And I said, well, of course I know it's not a Sputnik. But as far as I'm concerned, everything which is floating in the space is a Sputnik. And so they thought I was just being too kind of casual with this very serious work. Next, please. And the idea that these Sputniks in the room will be kind of taken over by like a distorted globe, so it's squished like a kind of an egg. I wanted to paint it yellow or gold. It's a fried egg. But joking apart, we had many very strange incidents. It was the story of the show was being more interesting than the exhibit. And the idea that these pieces would be kind of suspended over the globe and seen as if they are floating over like a galaxy of these pieces, these three-dimensional sculptural pieces, which were very, very refined pieces. Next, please. And the last room, it had the ugly work, and some historians think it is the most important part of the show, and others think it's a real disaster because it is the last room. And we decided to make a maze to start with where you don't see anything. And the idea you walk in, you see nothing. And as you turn around, you see through the maze glimpses of these very strange pieces. Of course, because of security, this could not be done. And I have a guy in my office, he's colorblind, and he was shown this drawing, and he looked at it for 10 minutes, and he said, well, that's very nice. What is it? And he saw it as black on black. So this is our next exploration, invisible drawings, which I can never show in a lecture because they don't register on the slide. Next, please. Someone once told me a story, which I'm sure was very vicious, that in Meyer's office, everything is white. They even use white ink on Mylar. And I thought, I thought that was a great idea. And I told my office, you see, you can do that. The high gallery, which is the space which as you enter. So because there were 2 pieces, which was the relief of Tatlin, which was found in somebody's basement. What is very interesting about this work was that it was dumped in basements for the last 70 years, 50 years, rotting, and they finally discovered it. And this, and I repeat, this was a really unique exhibition because it would be the first and last time it could be shown all together. They were borrowed from like 40 republics or 30 republics, and you can never collect them again. And so the red square had to go on a corner, and the relief by Tatlin also on a corner. And I decided that because it's the Guggenheim, they have to go on the non-corner spaces. And there were 12 curators. The Russian ones were totally beyond themselves. So I decided this was really a very beautiful moment because I'm not religious, but this room was very kind of religious, cosmic, whatever it was. It was a very important, also, it was very important to have one room, which is the biggest room in the Guggenheim, empty, and there were 1,200 pieces squeezed everywhere else. Next, please. So the red square, and that was what would have gone in the high gallery, was the posters, which I moved to another ramp. Next. So the red square, which becomes very prominent, and because nobody else had actually put a thing on that corner, well, non-corner, what was interesting for me was that wherever you went on the ground floor, you saw the red square. And that was really very, very exciting. Next, please. So you had the red square high up and the relief of Tatlin lower. So as you enter, Tatlin is at eye level and the red square is high up. Next. And as you move up the ramp, the walls become agitated to house the agitprop. Next. And I understand that Wright had devised a system which is very similar to this, intentionally for the ramps. So in the ramps, as you move up, because these zigzags occupy part of the ramp, you become squeezed in the ramps. Next. And as you go up, you look down to the highest gallery, you see at eye level the red square again. Next, please. And this for me was also a reminder of the kind of tectonic, which I did now 16, 17 years ago, which was given to us as a kind of a project, and how that really released a whole series of investigation into the significance of these movements in the early part of the century, and what the implication of them is in terms of kind of a new lifestyle and a new, how do we live in the next 10, 15 years at the time. Next, please. And also release the whole idea of new kind of drawing, the making of a new plan, and so on. Next, please. So the idea is that as you move towards the top of the higher ramps, the tectonic becomes a space and shields the ramps. Next. And that inside are shown all the lithograph and the books and photography, and at the top it leads into architecture, where you have the lineage of models. So the idea that you start with a kind of a series of implied work, which could be implied into architecture, and as you move up, it becomes a reality. And that these two things constantly kind of overlapped. Next. This dialogue between Tatlin and Malevich and their groups, obviously, they kind of overlapped constantly. If you are at the bottom of the rotunda, you will look up, you'll see these kind of cantilevering over the edge. Some of the pieces were made and they were brought to the Guggenheim refused to put up a scaffolding to erect these pieces, and they wanted to hoist them, and these pieces were bigger than this platform, so it was virtually impossible. Next. And this was the Tatlin, which was to occupy the entire rotunda. And obviously abstracted, so these pieces become really another thing. And there were two projects for this. One, which was that all of it was hung from a net from the ceiling, and then we changed the structure, and it's supposed to kind of spin, and as it kind of spins, it can actually get bolted to some of these ramps. So it's like a ribbon structure and made of steel. Next. Next. My Richard Meyer drawing. And this is kind of trying to establish the geometry of these two ribbons which overlap. Next. Next. Next, please. And right at the top, there was to be the last connection between Malevich and Tatlin, which is the kind of the flying machine. So while the tower is trying to kind of break through a skylight, the kind of flying machine, like Icarus, will try to escape or land through the skylight. And that dialogue between that and the return of Malevich to figurative work. Next. Which again, many people see as rather positive in terms of suprematism, but I think it's also a very interesting moment in the kind of the work of Malevich, because it had another kind of implication, although he suddenly became kind of dressed as if as a like a monk, but the clothing was done as if in a suprematist style, so it almost implied that the implication of suprematism finally kind of touched the people and could kind of change them spiritually. One actually is always speculative. Next, please. And back to the spaces themselves, the room 010, which has all the major suprematist work, which includes Malevich and Lisickis and Clunes. And eventually it became a change, and we wanted to paint. There was a point when the most important piece was the Black Square, which was really, again, a religious painting, and they had to wake up the curator at 3 a.m. to open the box, and she almost fainted. And anyway, I was having some fit there, and the guy told me to shut up, and I said, well, what do you mean? He said, be quiet. He said, because she might faint. I said, well, I don't really care if she faints. I mean, it's ridiculous. And we are at 3 a.m. trying to hang a show which opens the next day, and this woman is going to faint. Yes, you know, because the Black Square was so amazing, which it is amazing. And I have to tell you, this was, of course, a totally surreal experience, because I decided to occupy the ground with the kind of composition, the walls and the ceiling. And we had made a lot of effort to get someone to donate a lot of carpet to have these suprematist kind of figures, depending on the room, put on the floor. And one of the people at the Guggenheim kind of sabotaged this. So they said, why don't you use vinyl? And I was very reluctant to use vinyl, because I know that vinyl, it's very difficult to stick vinyl on the floor. So they bought the vinyl, they bought the vinyl stickers. The guys are going to, apply it, and these guys came, and these vinyl pieces were just colossal. And these guys applied half an inch and ran away. And the woman who was coordinating exhibitions, who became my pet hate, insisted that we can do it. So the only way to do this, and you have to understand, this room was mostly hung. This has the most important work in the show, and we had to dehang it, put it in the boxes, and the only way you can actually fix the vinyl on the floor and on the wall and the ceiling is to wet the floor with soap and water, wet the vinyl with soap and water, and glide it like an oil slick over the floor. So there was a flood on this kind of second gallery with the Malevich box sitting there precariously, and the Clunes in boxes. And then at 3 a.m. she was going to faint. Yes. So, of course, nobody dared tell me, don't paint a black cross, because they didn't have the black cross, so I said, I must bring a black cross. And they were, there were kind of emissaries coming every few minutes telling me different things. Next, please. And you can't really see it. I changed my mind in the last hour and decided to paint the cross not black but white. So it's almost invisible. You can see it on the ceiling. And it's because I did not have, for me, what was one of the most beautiful paintings, the white on white. And I spent a whole night trying to hang these ones which had to be hung in a progression from very small to very large gaps. Next, please. The paintings which are on the wall were supposed to be hung on arms very far. Can you go back to the slide, please? Can you go back one slide? These paintings were supposed to be hung on arms very far away from the wall. And the conservators had another epileptic fit. This is a black square which caused many faints. They were having, problems that respiratory, saying that there is too much humidity on the top. I said, well, and the Russians refused to put everything on the corner. I said, well, it's news to me, since the black square had to be on a corner, and it was impossible. So we decided to put the work which was borrowed from the Russian museums away on the wall, and the other work away from the wall. So it was really crazy. Next, please. This is the old vinyl which was slicked by soap and so on. As you go up to this part of the room, next please. And the boxes which become distorted, which have all the porcelain on the edge of the monitor room. Next. Next, please. The 5x5, the glass walls. Next. And this was supposed to have a black floor and dark, so you don't see anything. Next. Oh, well, they're upside down. Next. Suspended floating models. Next, please. Next time, I should actually hang it upside down. The theater section. Next. The Sputnik room. Next. So this was like, we painted this egg iridescent color, pearlized, so it glowed like a extraterrestrial object. And I personally had a great time in this room with this poor guy who was on a forklift who had to kind of position all the pieces. Next, please. These pieces are like float over the egg. Next. Next, please. And the last room, which is the first discussion hall, which was about really like visiting an artist's atelier. So it was a series of tables, horizontal and vertical, to see these works. Next, please. Next. And the kind of the lost dream of this kind of coincidence of Malevich and Tatlin to occupy the rotunda. Next, please. And I move on to Vitra. I was just talking earlier before I came in to Mike Rotondi about the condition of this commission. I designed the furniture a few years ago, which was published, and Rolf Feldbaum, who's the client, asked me if I would design a chair for Vitra. And after much, well, I didn't really try very hard to design a chair. He thought maybe because the chair had to always land on best 4 legs, I had difficulty. So he asked me if I would design the fire station. It's a pretty good trick. Somebody asked me to design a table, I say, no, I can't do it, and they gave me something else. And this was before the Gehry project was finished. And so it was this was a project which took a long time to design because on the plan, the site is so enormous and these sheds are so colossal. And to place a fire station would seem like a pimple on this kind of pretty banal landscape. And also it was very important to kind of really place it properly. Next, please. So we started with the project 1, or this is maybe the 5th one. There must have been about 20 Vitra projects, schemes. And by sheer accident, this was placed against another drawing for photography, against a drawing which was done for London. And at the time, I realized that I had to look at this project in a very different way before I can redesign the fire station. So in a way, a long time was spent designing everything else but the fire station. Next, please. Very early sketches to do with also what can, whether landscape, furniture, whatever. Next. And so we decided to look at the entire territory of the factory and to connect it. That would be a connection between the Vitra landscape, the internal landscape of Vitra, and the landscape of the area, the connection between industry and landscape, and that this kind of confined territory would have its own kind of, its own life, and in a way, trying to kind of really inject a degree of urbanism into the site because it was to become a public site because of the museum. Many people visited it, and I decided that it also required another layer of public activities superimposed on it before it becomes, and one of these pieces would be the fire station. So I started off as devising a system where Also, you can fence the whole side without actually fencing it. So it started off with this making a series of walls which are broken, and eventually this led on to making the walls which can actually capture space within them, and this exercise of trying to really see the connections within the factory itself took a long time. Next, please. So there are a series of voids on the side, which was supposed to also begin to be activated and to develop a skyline for this site. And so another syndrome started in the office because I had all the work, all my jobs were outside of London, so I had to always make a box. So I made these glass perspex briefcases, and at the time I still carried an Iraqi passport, and so I always had wonderful problems at airports. So I thought if I carried a plexi bag, they would not stop me. Next, please. And these were a series of studies on the configuration of the factory. So you start from the left with what was there at the time, which is like a kind of a canyon of buildings, leaving on its edge an empty space. And if I were then to look at the interior of these sheds, there are a series of very large rooms. And the idea that the other side of the factory, which will be developed later on, one side is being developed now by Caesar. And the idea that to make a room which is outdoors, but part of a series of the rooms which are on the side, but it becomes a corridor, like an outdoor room, which is a corridor which connects the two sides of the factory, and within it you have the fire station. So this space, which becomes like the rooms within the factory, like big spaces, becomes a deliberate kind of void, which is always there, and within it you can have this corridor, which is public, which connects the two sides of the factory. Next, please. Next. And so this very kind of long corridor, which becomes this void, becomes our immediate focus and becomes where you place the series of pieces which are public, and one of them towards the top. This was always supposed to be the place of the fire station, but we really did not know where to place it at the time. It was supposed to, and then we decided at the time to place it in such a way that actually as you enter the side, you see the building bending. Next. And then we began to kind of really understand the requirements of this brief, which is totally utilitarian. And what began to happen was to add more programs into it. So it was not just, there was a fire station, a club facility for the firemen, so the workers' meeting space, shower rooms and changing rooms, vaults for kind of storage. And the idea was always to make not just a shed for the trucks, but to make a room for the whole complex of buildings, which could be used for public events. Next, please. So this is going to be the space between the existing the existing buildings on one side and what would be coming up in the future. And the idea that at the beginning, next, that these begin to connect between all, because the problem with the site was that I felt that these buildings were too disparate, and there is no connection between them. They sit on a tray, but there is no kind of tissue that connects them. And the idea that you deal with the ground condition, which is the floor, and a series of pieces to kind of that they actually rest together and they begin to work together. And the idea was to infiltrate the gaps between the factories and maybe add more sheds or tea rooms or more spaces, which eventually become part of a series of public buildings which are inserted onto the site. Next, please. We later did a study for Weil, which is the city where Vitra is, which is to do with a kind of an planning investigation into adjacent sites and the overall infrastructure. So this room began to kind of, remained kind of rather just a space. Next. More study was to do how you occupy this very large space, which was oscillating between a room and a corridor. Next. And how they began to be connected, in both directions. Next. And it was always is to really to find a location for the fire station. Next, please. And so and the idea of then the series, these walls would begin to emerge to make an internal skyline, and that the building would be seen to start with as a kind of a solid, and as you build the rest of the factory next, this would become this permanent void. So the walls begin to dissolve in the void. Next, please. And there is now a new entrance, which is by the Gehry building, which then connects this whole space together. And the scale of the site is very varied. We have the sheds, and you have these domestic buildings at the back, which are very, very small. Next. And then we devised a journey through this corridor. Next. So as you pass through it, you can have a series of buildings. One of them is the fire station, which becomes almost invisible because the truck is disappeared behind these doors. Next. And some of these ideas remained. There are bridges, which is part of the kind of exercise for the firemen, because they have to have a kind of choreographic way of kind of training. Next. As you move towards the fire station, and right at the back was supposed to design, which is to be done in the future, the bicycle shed. So the program really enlarged to a series of other projects which were supposed to be put on the site. Next, please. And what began to emerge slowly through this work was that, and because the budget was extremely restrained, was this series of walls which were to capture space. Next, please. By now, it might be the scheme number 10. Next. 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 And then its final, more or less final version, the elements of this pieces, like a mechano, like a toy. Next. As we began to, so it's made, the thing on the right is where the ribs are where the trucks would go in. So they're kind of lanes. They are for 6 trucks, 5 trucks. And the dimension of this building, till about 2 months before it went on site, we always refer to it as our little building till it went on site, it is 90 meters long. So it's little but very long. And then what took a long time to place is all these different walls which hold the roof. So there are 4 walls, and the 3 beams, one which is a wet beam, which has the showers and changing rooms. One is a gymnasium, an exercise room, and also a training facility, and the room upstairs, which becomes the club room with the terrace. Next. All the firemen for the station, for this factory, are part of the workers of the factory. The appearance of these first 2 walls. Next. The long wall which stretches from one side of the shed, which is where the roof is, which holds the room above. So it's like one continuous wall, like a beam, a physical beam. Next. Next, please. And the roof, which took on also changed drastically over that period, till kind of it broke, and the front became more like a kind of canopy, moved away. Next. So the ground floor, the 2 beams collide over each other, or into each other, and they make kind of a space which becomes the changing areas. Next. There's like kind of worms like flies on a canvas. The 100 schemes for Vitra, as they kind of progressed, and what was eliminated, what was kept. Next. The many different changes of the roof, the plan, and the problem was also every time we had to kind of adjust the budget, we could not just chop it like a sausage. We had to kind of really change it constantly. So it was this constant change, which was a very reductivist activity, I think, which for me made this building very interesting. Next, please. And then eventually the walls with the beams went away, and what was left was the volumes, which was like the residual space of which is between the two walls. Next, please. Next. The slide before was the front, as the kind of beams cluster together. And this is the back, where you see one end is where the equipment room is, and you have the training facility is this kind of big glass wall. Next. Next. As the two beams kind of collide together. Next. And at the beginning there was a gap between them, and then we decided to kind of merge them together. And the roof changed and became also, it broke a bit, also became smaller. Next. Next, please. We did a series of very beautiful photographs of all the reinforcement, which was really like a kind of a knitted carpet of steel. This is as they were pouring the concrete. Next. And this is a sketch which was done very earlier on about the idea of the fencing, that it could be made of many poles. And 3 years later, the similarity between that and the reinforcement for the beam wall. Next, please. And in a way, the idea remained the same, that it's about spaces which cluster together next to a big shed. Next. And that is what is being formed, is the wall which comes from the ground and moves towards the top to make the third room. Next. The scaffolding which holds the roof when they were pouring the concrete. Next. Next. And that was the bend in the ceiling. And there are these very well-placed walls at the edges of this space. So the space is uninterrupted, about 30, 40 meters long. Next. You can see it through here from one end. Next. Next. And a series of studies of the elevation and how the canopy began to peel away to let light onto that wall. Next. As the building has this kind of series of very narrow, thin gaps, the forest of column which holds the canopy. Next. So it's the same roof which breaks at the point it meets the wall. Next. Next, please. And at night, there's a slit on the side which lights the wall in return. So in the day, there is this kind of light which comes naturally, and at night it's lit up. Next. And the light on this building is really very beautiful. Next. This side next to us now is completely preoccupied by a new factory. And so this wall coincides with almost the edge of the new factory to form the corridor. Next. Next, please. And I will try to take you inside the building and around it. Next, please. This is long before it was, I mean, it's almost finished now, but this was done 8, 9 months ago. Next, please. At this point in time, of course, all the doors have been installed and all the glass. We made a series of really enormous aluminum doors which slide back all the way and open out. So there's a point when the space is completely transparent, and when they close, it becomes an enclosed room. And we were always dealing with this very to make a space which is rather unusual, and because of where you stand, your perception of it is very different. Next, please. This is where all these different pieces of the building kind of meet. The beam above the canopy, which is part of the roof, and the beams which have the rooms. Next, please. This is the entrance. Next. And this is before the glass was put up, but the doors are now in the gap. And you see all these different beams kind of colliding to each other to make these very strange spaces between them. Next. Next, please. Is it possible to turn lights up there? Can we turn the lights off there? Next, please. And it was very difficult to photograph it even up to now because of all they were doing at the time, all the waterworks and the sewers, and now they're doing all the landscape. Next. Next. So this, as you turn around the building, so you start with the shed, you move around these beams. There's the club room, which opens onto the terrace. Next. There's also upside down. Next, please. And you see all the sides of the station. So this is all occupied by glass now. Next. Next. Next, please. Next. And then we come to the side of where the equipment room is. There's the wall of the equipment, because that's where they store all their very sophisticated clothes, is behind this wall. This is the side of the shed. Next. There's all glass on the side now. Next. If you are in the equipment room, there's another wall which separates it from the station. Next, please. And back into the main space. Next. Next. And we go around again. Next, please. So the wall stops here to kind of, the view was really stunning before, because you have this, which was unexpected, this view of the hill, which was very, very nice. But of course that's gone now, because there's a red brick building sitting next to us. Next. If you are in the space between the two beams, this room on the left, on the right, is where they would store some of their computer pieces, and there's kind of very, very slight shift between the two spaces. Next. And they've just installed the changing the dressing area, whatever, changing cupboards, lockers. The stainless steel doors or walls are all lockers. Next. And after the first initial phase, we studied the interiors. Next. And we did many studies of how we to paint this building internally. I mean, till this day, I get asked how I'm going to paint the outside, which is weird. But we did many studies, because the intention originally was that the outside is concrete and the interior is very bright. And then as this project began to go outside, I changed my mind. I did not want any color inside. And people still expect it to be either red or orange. Next. Studies of the lockers. And what was really, the lockers have this kind of space between them. So what was happening on the outside, there was kind of vignettes between the two beams, occurs on the outside, on the inside as well. Next. A study of many handrails, one of which is this. Next. The wall stops here to kind of, the view was really stunning before, because you have this, which was unexpected, this view of the hill, which was very, very nice. But of course that's gone now, because there's a red brick building sitting next to us. Next. if you are in the space between the two beams, this room on the left, on the right, is where they will store some of their computer pieces, and there's kind of very slight shift between the two spaces. Next. And they've just installed the changing the dressing area, whatever, changing cupboards, lockers. The stainless steel doors or walls are all lockers. Next. And with after the first initial phase, we studied the interiors. Next. And we did many studies of how we to paint this building internally. I mean, till this day, I get asked how I'm going to paint the outside, which is weird, but we did many studies because the intention originally was that the outside is concrete and the interior is very bright. And then as this project began to go outside, I changed my mind. I did not want any color inside. And people still expect it to be either red or orange. Next. Studies of the lockers. And what was really, the lockers have this kind of space between them. So what was happening on the outside, there was kind of vignettes between the two beams occurs on the outside, on the inside as well. Next. A study of many handrails, one of which is this. Next. And the space is very, very long. And this is the kind of where the training facilities are. And the gym, and between all these cupboards, which are men and women, and a third one, which shows the glass wall to the edge, and you can see it into the bathrooms and the shower rooms. Next, please. So the wet area is shielded from the kind of gymnasium by this series of stainless steel and steel cabinets, which are the lockers. Next, please. The early part of the concrete work where the presence of the room above becomes a light on the ceiling. Next. And the gap of the stair. Next. Next, please. The club room, which is the meeting room for the firemen. So, the whole notion of this was that they had to have with great speed, move through the gym, through the wet room to the main station, and that's where they kind of all collided into the station. So the kind of rapid movement when there was fire, and the upstairs is really their leisure room there, where they meet and discuss and they train. Next, please. Next. Next. The light is not green. The photographer decided to decorate the room. That was kind of too plain. Next, please. There's only one wall, but it's very dark, almost blood red. Dried blood. Sorry. I don't mean to be vulgar, but working in Switzerland for 3 years, every time I went there, I had to do something outrageous. Next. And also the quality of the light in all this space is really very nice. Next, please. And also the building changes a lot and depending on the weather. Next. If you go through the slides slowly because they are another rotation and they're more recent. Next. Just the beginning to lay the landscape, which is made of kind of a canvas, strips of grass and gravel and tarmac. Next. The slits are part of the bathrooms. The windows to the kind of the what first aid room, like with where maybe a doctor or something. The men's room and women's room, and the other room, which is the mechanical storage room for mechanical things. Next. Next. And these drawings and models really were a lapse of 2 years, almost, a year between them. Next. Next. Next, please. Next. This is before they did landscape. Next. Can you move through this? Next, please. Next, please. And this is the roof, and this is the buildings on the other side of the factory. This kind of really banal kind of condition of this kind of rubber floor and PVC and the roof of the houses next door. And the scale was very vast between the different perimeters of the site. Next, please. And I go to the last project I show is the project in Düsseldorf, which was, we won a competition 3 years ago for a harbor development. Again, I had another harbor development in Hamburg. And also when I was teaching in the AA, we did many studies on the London dockland. And it was very important that, these parcels of land which are, left over from disused kind of industry, and also they are very adjacent to an existing context of a city, they had to be addressed in a very different way. And therefore, one had to look at the connection between the existing fabric, which has a certain metropolitan kind of condition, the new intervention, which could not really historically connect to what was there before, because it's no longer about industry, and also a connection between it and the fabric of the city in general. Next, please. This building is now demolished, and this is a well-known building because that's where the studios were, Jost Beuys and worked on all these people. So it was a very big political controversy to demolish this one building, and this was called Zollhof 3. Next. And it's right on the water. The site is about 300 meters long. And obviously this is the first time that these conditions become available for occupation in terms of kind of program, a new program imposed on the city, because the edge, these buildings as warehouse always went to the edge of the water, and they were made of like a series of walls which occupied the waterfront. And when our first initial reaction was to actually begin to connect to the water in a series of different ways. Next. This was, they call media center, so it has to do with some sort of a kind of either TV or radio stations, studios for artists or workshops, cinema, and then there's a whole layer of public facilities like restaurants and shops and so on, and then offices. The central part of this office building is a headquarters for an advertising agency. A whole series of studies to do with the ground and its neighboring streets. Next. Are we stuck? And these studies also showed where these series of breaks could take place. Next. So the pressure was to generate an energy within an urban site, and how you begin to do that, but also how to make a new kind of office space in terms of the way that you deal with these buildings which are on the site. Next, please. Next. This is a very early model. And so, again, we were preoccupied how to generate, because this was the first building to be developed on the harbor, to generate a skyline for this section of the city. And that what began to emerge is that it's made of, to start with one continuous wall, which is by the sheer force of applying certain kind of tactics to it, one of which was like we did all with how the land began to change. It broke it into various pieces, which obviously opened the kind of wall to the water. Next. This kind of crack in the ground. Next. So on the far corner is the series of 5 what we call slabettes, which kind of converge together to make one building, and there are a series of offices which are quite narrow, and it works very well in Germany. This kind of narrow office space because of the requirement for daylight from the window, but of course, maybe for them it was too narrow, and they kind of collide together to form central spaces, which are off-central spaces, which are made, which we then carved away to make a series of meeting rooms and so on. So the wall breaks a second time to enter the site from the street. The plaza is then the triangle which hits the site, dives down, and as it dives down, the ground begins to kind of lift up and house all the accommodation which is apart from the offices on the site. So there's another layer of world below what we call new grade, the new ground level, next, which are the studios and shops and so on. Next, please. And we began a series of studies about the quality of this building in terms of the plan and also in terms of the collision between these two spaces and what that means in terms of kind of light and shadow and so on. Next, please. And because of this linear quality of these slabs, and because they're also the fire requirements, which, although it was the fire requirements were an accident, in the sense that it demanded that these places are relatively fluid, and these partitions are not full height, so these mountains have to be quite low, and they become much more this kind of fluid space, like open offices, but they are much more fluid, and in the middle, at the beginning, we carved out these spaces for a series of meeting rooms, which become kind of used by the whole agency. And the idea was originally also that each of these fingers has one part of the discipline of the kind of prose of this kind of artistic prose of this agency, and they can all meet together, kind of discuss ideas and part of the voids which are carved away between these fingers. Next, please. Next. And then, as this is the spaces, the very narrow space between the slabs. Next. Of course, the dimension, which took us a long time to adjust to, because we had always thought of it like a very small building, but these slabs are like 60 meters long, each one of them. The side is 200 meters long, 280 meters long. Next, please. And how they kind of really, the cluster of these buildings together form the skyline, and then they begin to kind of undulate on height. Next. And the idea that you occupy various layers of the site, you occupy the ground below, which is really not below ground, which is almost ground. The quality of the transparency of the building. So what also began to emerge was that the fingers become predominantly glass, become completely transparent, and the rest of the building is relatively solid, and that the only way you can really enter the site is through under the fingers and through this gap, this very narrow gap between the wall which is broken, and that's where the triangle hits it, and that's how you enter. And it connects to an adjacent street, and you can cross the street and just enter through this gap into the side, and that's when you see the waterfront. Next, please. Next. And the cinema at the other end, we needed, the city has been really extremely understanding with us and extremely generous. It's a very unusual situation in Germany where usually they bombard you with requirements which we had to meet, but on the other hand, they kind of really accommodated as much as possible. And at the time, we had built the site too close to the neighboring building, and we had to move it up, and we required more land, so they gave us more land to kind of fit in the cinema. So the cinema is at the edge of which is this kind of wall, which becomes a service wall and wraps around the cinema, and you can enter it from above ground and below ground. So it becomes part of this kind of media zone below ground. Next. And this is the plaza which dives down. So as this dives down and the other pieces lift up as if the ground is always constantly, very subtly breaking. Next. So it makes many kind of fields which is more approximate to you, and they become more your most immediate landscape. Next. The world below. And the idea that the roof of the part which is peeling up, which is where the shops are and restaurants, becomes also like a kind of canvas and becomes a very large terrace for the offices. Next. And this is where the plaza kind of cuts aside, and also the building, which is the long building, which is called Block A. I never can recite the fingers because people call them A, B, C, D, whatever they are. So I always have to go with my hand like this, like a 3-year-old. This bridges over the plaza, so you walk underneath it, and that also is where you enter. You enter through this other ramp, which is on the edge of it. Next, please. So these two conditions kind of converge: the break and the plaza where it hits the corner. Next. So this is the cluster of the slabs, the plaza which dives in, which is a public space, and the idea was also that this land, which is all industrial, that would have a new kind of urbanism and a new kind of life. So it is also operates all day and part of the night, with the cinema and the shops and the restaurant on the corner. And the idea with the internal landscape is also organized that it could be tiered, like a kind of a series of tiers, which becomes also one space, like another large room on the harbor. Next, please. Maybe you should put them one at a time. I've been blessed for years. This hasn't happened to me. And thank God they're not my carousels. Next, please. So this is the oops. Next, please. And so this project also went through various phases. The first phase was to do feasibility with the client. Then we did in the last year, we've done the building permit drawings, which was quite a feat for us. Because this is, again, there was an incredible jump in scale in terms of the building size. And but we always simultaneously, as we do these we had to do these very technical so-called drawings. We had to always explore this building three-dimensionally. These drawings are not done as a kind of presentation drawings, but they're done during the process of development of this project, because we had to look at the quality of the transparency of this building, which one of the fingers have to be different, how these fingers land on the ground, and the quality of the structure within these relatively transparent buildings. Next. And we emerged a long time ago that there is one finger which had to be different, which is the one which you enter under, and that became like a Virundile, so like a bridge structure. And of course, the irony is this seems to be, it's the heaviest because it's concrete, but it is the only one which is floating in this entire project. So you enter underneath it. Next, please. But that is the only one which is like a bridge, which is the concrete one, which is the finger which slides through. And within the plan, it became the only finger which is unoccupied by any kind of core and structure, because the structure is on the sides. So that really is the ground totally. So you go up towards the entry, you enter a glass box, and you filter through the building through a staircase or elevators which are on the side of the building. Next, please. There's a section for the building permit. I only show this because there are, 70 drawings which we took to the building permit. We arrived at the airport with 8 boxes this big to take to Düsseldorf. And there were 64 files or something crazy. And I show this because I like the section which shows zero structure. This is someone, 10 years ago, they said this is not buildable. And thank God for Avi Arabs, who have helped me tremendously over the years. Next, please. So each of the slabs lands in a relatively different way. One lands in like a forest of columns. The other one is cantilevered from below. The other one, which also accommodates the different, all the cores, and they become like objects on the ground. So that as you move towards the entrance of this building, where everything is almost lifted up, you see this kind of forest of different kind of landing of this building, because in each case the structure transfers to different condition on the ground. Next, please. As you approach the building, it says, as you go into the glass room, and you because there are 4 or 5 fingers which collide, and then one which is separate, which is also to be leased separately, and what connects them like a kind of a space which is all glass. Next. And some of the rooms above and the slabs are also double height, and they could be used for meeting spaces and rooms for kind of gatherings. And because of the varying kind of roof, the skyline, and in many cases they have adjacent roof terraces. Next. And then we began to look at the configuration of the cores, which became, because of regulation, it became the very dominant piece of this project. Next. So I started off kind of broken up, and then we decided to kind of cluster them together to make them like a solid, like a kind of a highway crossing through the building. Next. And we began to occur as they were broken this way, and in a later phase, they began to kind of have slits between them. So you can see through the building in a direct way. So it began to cluster together around the entry, and they form one space, which is solid through the building. What that left is the central part, which is the Verandil, totally a very long space, which is unoccupied by anything. Next, please. The skyline internally of these the cores, and how they leave these kind of thin gaps constantly between them. So if you are on the next building, you see through the gaps all the way through all the fingers. Next. There's the building and the cores together. Next. Our engineers had a good time one day. Anyway, they can use, you see, it says unexpected and amazing structures. So we began to say, every time they came for a meeting, I said it's terribly boring and so adventurous, and and then, but of course we didn't want to do a catalog of every file of structure. Next. This different study of the different condition on the ground as you enter these different series of, so this idea of the kind of this difference between they are compressed completely as you enter the building under the Verandil, and then the ground begins to peel up and the buildings begin to come over your head, so you're compressed into this kind of forest of these different pieces, and then you enter the building. Next, please. The forest of columns. Next. That's when they become invisible, white on white. Next. And so the long building, which has a series of kind of plates which rest over each other, almost a kind of cantilever. And of course, if you're in the long building, the skyline is very approximate to you, so you can see right through it. And the idea that you can't see through all these layers of glass all the way across. Next. And that also, because of this kind of peeling and cantilevering, it leaves terraces in the air. Next. So that the ground, the public space is not only, the civic zone is not only on the ground, but there are many grounds, which is subterranean, ground level, above ground level, just 2 meters above the ground, as all these kind of ground conditions begin to peel up and down, and then also in the halls in the building. Next. A study about how the long building begins to kind of be fenestrated, because this is all in situ concrete, and we have to kind of have some windows in it. Next. The gap between the two buildings, A and B. The B was supposed to be a really media space with a black box, which is like a radio station, and the gap in between. This is where, as you enter and you go down to the plaza on a very shallow ramp. Next. The black box, which is an unusual room, which was supposed to be originally a station, like a radio studio or something. Very sophisticated studio room. But I think that is not going to happen. Next, please. Uh-oh. The elevation study of the back wall. And you can see slowly as the ground begins to peel up towards it. Next. We're now into black and black. Originally, these buildings were black. Would be either black granite or in situ concrete. So there's two different conditions, one which is very solid and dark, and one which is very transparent and totally translucent. Next, please. And then, because of the flood condition on the side, because it's next to the water, it became very expensive to dig a very deep basement, so we decided that the ground will, as if by the force of the flood, begin to erupt. So everything is slightly peeling above ground. Next. So it has kind of had many kind of impositions on it, one of which is now as if the ground, which was almost flat, was flat on the street, began to lift up a great deal. Next. And how all these different planes begin to kind of undulate on the ground. And they become, instead of kind of using, there's only one, the hashed area is the only area which is green. You have to understand also politically, this one was very green. And I remember, I'm not sure I said this many years ago, I used to say this, and now I say it very discreetly, that I did not at the time like nature. I like it better these days, but grass is the limit I can go to. I know it's not politically correct, but that's how I feel about it. And so we went there for this project. This is like 2 years in the making of this project, and then they finally said, oh, well, where is the shrubs in the front of the building? I said, where is it? What? There's only concrete. I said, what do you want me to put there, tulips? And so I told the guy in the office, please put some tulip patches here, which was enough to, freak them out. But the idea is that the ground is really an extension of the street. The front is about the condition of the water, and that it is tiered, and that's where people sit and can have their lunches and picnics. And it is an extension of the promenade, because this part of the city, people on weekends is very crowded, and people walk around by the water from all over Düsseldorf, and there's two sides to the embankment. They will sit on the green. And the idea is that the triangle, which is peeling up, not the plaza, is also a landscape. Next. So the intention was that the street begins to kind of really, through this eruption, lift up as you enter the building. And these are all incisions on the ground, and there are differences in levels as you enter it. The plaza is made of kind of in situ concrete, which is lit, which has kind of also glass in it to be lit at night. Next. And a series of studies of this peeling condition of the ground. Next, please. And it's in many layers, so that we did many studies about how this could actually take place. Next. Which had to become very subtle steps as you move over it. Next. And this is the invisible series of drawings, which shows how you actually can move through the building, which are so invisible, I can't tell you what they are. Next. We had a great time this summer, and even a few months ago. We had I was very lucky in the last few years. I had some people who applied for work in the office who were not architects. One who did all my models, and he was he designed equipment for an engineer. And I hired him, and everybody asked him, why was I hiring this guy? Nothing to do with architecture. And I said, I liked him. And he did these fantastic models for us. And the same happened again with this painter who came apply for a job, who's a Brazilian. And he didn't paint. He didn't show me a portfolio of paintings. He showed me a quilt. And I hired him again. And everybody thought I was really losing it. And he did what I thought was very beautiful and visible paintings. Next, please. Next. So this shows how you can enter certain buildings, how you enter the plaza, how you go to the cinema, so on. Next, please. And a painting, which is still, a drawing is still in the making, which is part of a whole series of drawings which I've done over the years, which shows everything to do with this project, how it connects to the site, that is next to the water, how the ground condition works, how it looks on its edge, from another kind of view of the city. If you're looking at it from below water level. Next, please. So you see the building, but you see also the elevation of Block A. Next. You see the kind of the slabs as you enter them. Next. And the cluster of all the offices. And for me, what was always very exciting about this project, for me and you personally, was that you work in this constantly approximate position to your neighbors, and the only thing that separates you is air, so you can see them 1 meter away from you, but you cannot reach them because of this air gap. And that's it. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I'm losing my voice, but I can take some questions if there are any. If there aren't any, I'll wish you good night. Thank you very much again. Pardon? You want one? You have a question? Okay. I really have deliberately stayed away from feminist. It's not because I'm not a feminist, but I don't deal with the gender, because I think we do ourselves a great injustice by isolating ourselves in like a leprosy colony. And I think what is beginning to emerge, the question was whether women deal with space differently. Is that correct? Well, if you heard Peter Eisenman in New York 2 weeks ago, you would think so. Which was interesting for me what he said, but I think I personally could not say whether women operate differently. I think they do perceive things differently, But I don't know how, because I'm not only a woman, I am not a European. So I don't know whether it has to do with my gender or my nationality or because of other things. But I think there is a different sensibility, but I don't know where it is. So I can't answer it, really. But I think it's very important for women to know that they can deal with things, whether better or worse, but differently, and they should just stick to their guns and do it. I mean, I tease a lot of women who work for me in the office, because whenever it comes to midnight, they start, crying that their boyfriends want them home, and I tell them to F themselves and excuse me, because I've never heard one guy in my office over the 10 years I've had people there ever mention to me that they have to go home because his wife wants him. And I tell women who come to my office, don't ever use that excuse, because it makes me angry. Because women are always marginalized because of their, constant, they abandon their faith. And that's nothing to do with deliberately. There is a lot of pressure on them. But I think that, I think it's very important that women do not lose their femininity. They don't have to become like men to achieve what they want. It's very difficult, it's very tough. I'm constantly patronized, by my men I know. One example, a close friend of mine, Eric Moss, used to always pat me on the shoulder, tell me, "You're okay for women." And I used to really get very angry. And even a few months ago, after years of knowing him, and I love him dearly, and he's a wonderful guy. I was in Vienna in a symposium, Tom Mann was there, and he said, "Oh, Zaha, we are amazed, you are smart." And I thought, they really think we are kind of, they always thought I'm some kind of brainless, Arab princess who kind of floating in my kaftan. Which maybe I am, but... Many years ago in London, I discovered a trick for the English particularly, is that the only way for me to distract them is to become hysterical. And because they could not deal with it. Peter Cook didn't know what to do with me. I was, Alvin Boyarsky was not English, just couldn't cope with me. Nobody could, because I was known to be hysterical. But it was very calculated on my part. I deliberately freaked them out. So they thought, she's nutty. It's okay. She can, let her do her thing. And that is the thing about England, is that it is the school, the AA, survived because they allowed people to be crazy. But the English never allow you to go to, actually, when push comes to shove, they don't let you do it. And that's why I think the AA was a wonderful school because of this allowance, that you can afford to be different. And I think if many schools do that, it'd be great, And for me, it was very, liberating. But I did freak them out. They couldn't deal with me. The same with the Japanese. I wasn't a man, I wasn't a woman. I was a Zaha, so it was fine. And it's really true. More than one Japanese told me that, well, you're not like a woman. And I said, well, what am I? So, but they couldn't do me as a kind of another thing. And you find that true of many cases. But, in my lifetime, also had a lot of men support me. I've always worked with men in my office, with my students. I used to be called Zaha and the boys because they were all these funny guys. And so I can't say that they have not supported me, but they have. And so, I have nothing to really complain about. I've been very lucky. Thank you. No one else? Okay. Well, short of slicing my brain in two halves and showing it to you, I think that drawing, for me anyway, there are very different ways of, showing it. Actually, I can never show what I think. But as a tool, it is one tool which is, for me, is useful. It's like telling a scientist he can only work in a particular way. This is my tool. Whether it's appropriate for others or not, it is definitely appropriate for me, and that's how I can, through the drawing, I can explore other territories, which I wouldn't otherwise be able to. Now, I don't do it because of, for people to either appreciate or to like it or understand it. I predominantly do it for myself. And if it can connect to people, that's fine. But it's done really as a process of my thinking. But I don't, when I have a project, I don't draw immediately. I have to work it on my head. So nobody can really see that precisely. Let me also say one more thing. Drawing was, for me, excessively important because the whole idea of projection, of projecting a new kind of three-dimensional possibility, explored, and the whole idea of doing many different vanishing points of perspective was very important, and for me to develop this work. I don't think I could have done it without it. That's Pardon? Pardon? How has it influenced my architecture? How my background being this? Well, I think the notion of displacement is very important. In my case, because I think being displaced could be very liberating, and I think it would be much more difficult for me if I was an English person living in London. It would be a different situation. So I think it was very liberating, but of course, it is also very difficult because a lot of people get commission from their country, and I'm not likely to get one from Iraq, so I'm always seen as the outsider, which suits me also fine. I think to every situation there's an advantage and disadvantage, and if the advantage works for you, then you can't complain about the other side of it. But I think it does. Displacement could be very positive and very negative, and in my case, I find very liberating experience. That's it. Thank you.